What happens when a routine flight turns into a battleground for respect? On a packed flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, a decorated doctor, a woman who had dedicated her life to saving others, was denied a simple glass of water. The reason? The color of her skin. The flight attendant thought she was just another passenger she could ignore, another face she could dismiss. But she made one critical mistake. She had no idea who was sitting just one row behind, watching her every move, recording her every word. This wasn't just a rude flight attendant. This was a collision of prejudice and power, and the fallout would be more explosive than anyone could imagine. Stay with me as we unravel this shocking real-life drama. The polished chrome and hushed ambience of the first-class cabin on Sterling Airlines Flight 729 were meant to exude an air of serene exclusivity. For Dr. Alani Taylor, it was a rare moment of respite. The past 72 hours had been a blur of sterile operating rooms, the frantic beeping of monitors, and the life-or-death decisions that were the daily currency of her profession as a leading cardiothoracic surgeon. The conference in Atlanta had been a success. She had presented her latest research on minimally invasive robotic surgery to a packed auditorium of her peers, a sea of faces that she noted with a familiar weary pang looked very little like her own. Now, settling into the plush leather of seat 2B, she finally allowed the tension in her shoulders to ease. The flight to her home in San Francisco was a welcome 5-hour buffer between the intense demands of her work and the quiet sanctuary of her life. She was a woman who had earned her place in this world, stitch by stitch, life by saved life. Her tailored blazer, though simple, was from a designer whose name was whispered in circles of quiet luxury, and the worn leather briefcase at her feet contained not just medical journals, but the blueprints for a new community health initiative she was launching. Yet, as she often found the credentials, the accolades, the sheer force of her will and intellect could sometimes evaporate the moment she stepped out of the hospital, leaving her to be judged by a far older and more primitive metric. The flight attendant assigned to the first-class cabin introduced herself with a smile that was bright practiced and to Alani's discerning eye selectively applied. Her name tag read Susan. She was a woman in her late 40s with meticulously coiffed blonde hair and a gaze that swept over her passengers with the evaluative precision of an auctioneer. She offered pre-departure champagne to the man in 2A, a portly executive already barking into his phone, and to the couple in row 1 who looked like they'd stepped out of a yacht club catalogue. When her eyes landed on Alani, the smile didn't so much vanish as it did shrink. It tightened at the edges, the warmth receding like a tide going out. "Can I get you something?" Susan asked, her tone clipped, lacking the deferential warmth she'd offered the others. "I'd love a glass of water, please, with lemon, if you have it." Alani replied, her voice calm and even. Susan gave a curt nod and moved on without another word. The man in 2A received his champagne. The couple in row 1 were poured a second glass. The cabin door was about to close, and Alani's seat remained conspicuously empty of a simple glass of water. It was a small thing, a minor oversight, perhaps. Alani was used to giving people the benefit of the doubt. In her line of work, assumptions could be fatal. She preferred data observation and patterns. The plane pushed back from the gate, and still no water. After takeoff, as the seatbelt sign pinged off, Susan began her service. She moved with an efficiency that was impressive, but her interactions remained a study in contrasts. With the white passengers, she was engaging, laughing at a joke from the man in 2A, discussing travel plans with the couple in row 1. When she approached Alani, the curtain of professional indifference dropped again. "And for you?" she asked her pen, hovering over her notepad, her body angled slightly away, as if preparing for a quick escape. "I'll have the grilled salmon, please," Alani said. "And I'd still love that glass of water with lemon." Susan's eyes flickered with something that looked like annoyance. "The salmon is a very popular choice today," she said, a subtle implication that Alani's selection was somehow predictable or unoriginal. "I'll see if we still have it." She turned and walked away before Alani could respond. The pattern was beginning to form. It was a calculus of slights too small to be called out individually, without seeming petty, but which, when added together, created a significant and undeniable deficit of respect. It was the way Susan's eyes would skate past her, the way she refilled every other passenger's glass but seemed to develop a sudden blind spot around seat 2B, the perfunctory manner in which she placed the meal tray down without the customary "enjoy your meal." Alani ate her salmon, which did in fact arrive. It was perfectly cooked. She read through a medical journal highlighting passages with a steady hand. She refused to let the woman's attitude curdle her peace. She had faced down failing hearts and labyrinthine arteries. She would not be defeated by the passive aggression of a flight attendant. She was a master of control, of maintaining grace under pressure. Her operating room was a theater of calm, and she would make this small sliver of the world her own theater too. But the performance was becoming more difficult to maintain. An hour later, she pressed the call button. She wanted another bottle of water. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10, 15. Susan walked past her seat 3 times, attending to other passengers, her movements a deliberate pantomime of busyness. On the 3rd pass, Alani made eye contact with her. Susan's expression was a blank wall. She looked directly at Alani, saw the illuminated call light above her head, and turned to ask the man in 2A if he needed another top-up of wine. The act was no longer passive. It was a direct and intentional refusal. The message was clear. You are invisible. Your needs are not my concern. You in this seat do not belong. Alani's heart, the very organ she spent her days mending, began to beat a little faster, a low thrum of anger mixing with a profound bone-deep weariness. She had fought so hard for so long to be seen, to be respected, to be judged on the content of her character and the skill of her hands. And yet here she was, 30,000 feet in the air, in a seat she had paid for, with the fruits of her own relentless labor, being treated like an interloper, a ghost in the machine. She took a slow, deep breath, the kind she used to steady her hands before a critical incision. She could escalate. She could demand to speak to the purser. She could cause a scene that would ripple through the quiet cabin. But that was what the Susans of the world expected, wasn't it? The angry black woman proving their prejudice right? No. That was not her way. She would wait. She would document. She would be the surgeon observing the symptoms, making a diagnosis, and planning a precise, effective intervention. What Alani didn't know, what Susan in her bubble of petty tyranny could never have imagined, was that this was not a private theater with an audience of one. A crucial witness was observing the entire ugly performance. In seat 3D sat David Chen, the founder and CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm in Silicon Valley. He was a man who had built an empire on his ability to read people, to see the subtle signals they emitted, to understand the unspoken dynamics of power and influence. He was on this flight by chance, having cut short his Atlanta trip to get back for his daughter's birthday. He was unassuming in a simple grey hoodie and jeans, his laptop open, but his attention fixed on the quiet drama unfolding a row ahead of him. He had seen it all: the dismissive tone, the selective service, the ignored call light. He had watched the calm, elegant woman in 2B maintain a level of composure he found frankly heroic, and he had seen the smug, self-satisfied expression on the flight attendant's face. David Chen was a man who abhorred injustice, but he was also a man who understood optics and leverage. He knew that a direct confrontation now might only result in a messy, inconclusive "he said, she said." So he did what he did best. He observed. He took out his phone, and with the practiced subtlety of someone who valued discretion, he angled it just so. He didn't need a clear video of faces, he just needed to capture the context. He filmed the illuminated call light above 2B. He filmed Susan walking past her face, a mask of deliberate ignorance. He recorded the audio of her fawning over the passenger in 2A, while the call light for Dr. Alani Taylor remained stubbornly accusingly on. He was collecting data, and in his world, data was power. The flight continued its westward journey, a silver needle stitching across the vast fabric of the country. Inside in the climate-controlled bubble of first class, a storm was gathering. Susan, blissfully unaware, believed she was the one in control, the gatekeeper of service and respect. She had no idea that she was merely a bit player in a much larger drama, and that she was being watched by two people who in their own very different ways were about to change her life forever. The unseen passenger in 2B was a titan of medicine. The unseen witness in 3D was a king of industry. And the collision course was set. The descent into San Francisco began the California coastline, emerging from the haze like a promised land. For most passengers, it was a time of quiet anticipation of packing away laptops and preparing for landing. For Alani, it was the final act of a play she had been forced to endure. The ignored call light had become a silent, glowing monument to the flight's pervasive hostility. After 25 minutes, she had pressed it again, a quiet act of defiance. The light remained on a beacon in the dimming cabin light, and Susan continued her charade of oblivious efficiency. Alani knew the moment for quiet observation was over. The slight had moved from passive neglect to an active, undeniable act of prejudice. It wasn't just about a bottle of water anymore. It was about the fundamental right to be acknowledged, the basic decency afforded to any human being, let alone a paying customer in a premium cabin. She needed to create a record, a clear, unambiguous event that could not be explained away by busyness or oversight. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her movements fluid and deliberate. She walked the few steps to the galley at the front of the cabin, where Susan was methodically arranging silver coffee pots on a tray, her back to the aisle. "Excuse me," Alani said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the low hum of the engines with crystalline clarity. Susan froze for a fraction of a second before turning around. Her face, when she saw Alani standing there, was a carefully constructed mask of surprise, as if she couldn't fathom why a passenger would leave their seat. "Ma'am, we're beginning our initial descent. You need to return to your seat and buckle up." "I will," Alani replied, her gaze steady. "But first, I need to understand something. I have pressed my call button twice in the last hour. The light has been on for a significant amount of time. I've watched you walk past my seat at least a half-dozen times while providing service to every other passenger around me. You have made eye contact with me, and you have consciously chosen to ignore me. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for an explanation." The galley, a small confined space, suddenly felt like a courtroom. The air crackled with tension. Susan's professional veneer finally cracked, and a flash of raw, unfiltered resentment showed in her eyes. It was the look of someone whose petty authority had been challenged, whose carefully curated world had been disrupted. "I have been attending to the needs of all my passengers," Susan retorted, her voice hardening, putting a sharp, defensive emphasis on the word all. "We have been extremely busy, and we are preparing for landing. It's a safety issue. Now, please return to your seat." "The safety issue seems to be a recent concern," Alani countered calmly, not raising her voice. "It didn't seem to be an issue when you were pouring a third glass of wine for the gentleman in 2A 10 minutes ago while my call light was on, or when you spent 5 minutes discussing vacation plans with the couple in row 1. The only passenger whose needs have been consistently overlooked is me. The only passenger who looks like me." It was out there now. The accusation, unspoken but heavily implied for hours, was finally given voice. The color line, invisible but stark, had been drawn in the air between them. Susan's face flushed a blotchy, angry red. She took a step forward, her body language shifting from defensive to aggressive. "Now you listen to me," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I don't know who you think you are, but you will not come in here and accuse me of that. I have been a flight attendant for 20 years. I treat everyone the same. You are making this a problem. You are the one creating a scene." She was gaslighting her. It was a classic textbook maneuver. Deny attack and reverse victim and offender. But Alani was not a typical victim. She was a surgeon. She diagnosed pathologies for a living, whether they were in a human heart or a human interaction. "I am not creating a scene," Alani said, her voice dropping to a near whisper to match Susan's, forcing the flight attendant to lean in slightly. "I am stating facts, and the fact is your service has been discriminatory, and I promise you this will not be the end of it." Just as the tension reached its peak, a third voice entered the charged atmosphere. "She's not wrong, you know." Both women turned. David Chen was standing at the entrance to the galley, his arms crossed, his expression one of mild disappointment. He had his phone in his hand, held loosely at his side, but the implication was clear. Susan's eyes widened. She hadn't accounted for him. The quiet man in the hoodie. "Sir, I must ask you to return to your seat as well. We are landing." David ignored her, his eyes fixed on Susan's face. "I've been watching for the last 2 hours," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "I watched you ignore her pre-departure request. I watched you pointedly refuse to refill her water glass while refilling everyone else's. I saw her call light go on, and I watched you walk right past it multiple times. I heard the difference in your tone of voice when you spoke to her versus when you spoke to the other passengers. And just now, I heard your completely unprofessional and hostile response to a legitimate customer complaint." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So no, she's not the one creating a scene. You are. And you have been for this entire flight." Susan looked as if she'd been struck. Her jaw worked silently. To be called out so directly, so publicly, and by another first-class passenger was a devastating blow to her narrative. She looked from David's calm, implacable face to Alani's resolute expression, the two of them a united front. Her mind scrambled for a defense, a way to regain control. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, falling back on bluster. "I am the lead flight attendant in this cabin. I am responsible for safety. Both of you are in violation of FAA regulations by being out of your seats during descent. Now sit down, or I will be forced to report this incident to the captain." It was a weak threat, and everyone knew it. The incident she was threatening to report was one of her own making. "Please do," David said with a serene nod. "In fact, I insist. Make sure you give him our seat numbers, 2B and 3D. Tell him we have a complaint regarding a pattern of discriminatory behavior from his cabin crew. Tell him I have video evidence of the ignored call light. Be very specific." He looked at Alani. "Dr. Taylor, I believe you should return to your seat. You've made your point." The use of her professional title, Dr. Taylor, hung in the air. It was a subtle but powerful move, recontextualizing Alani not as a troublemaker, but as a person of stature, a professional who commanded respect. Susan's eyes flickered towards Alani, a flicker of new, unwelcome information being processed. Alani gave a slight nod to David, a silent acknowledgement of his unexpected and powerful alliance. She turned without another word to Susan and walked back to her seat, her back straight, her head held high. David followed a moment later. The cabin was silent, but it was a heavy, charged silence. The other passengers who had been pretending not to notice were now overtly staring, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Susan, flustered and exposed, retreated into the galley, her face a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The quiet authority of Dr. Alani Taylor, backed by the unexpected intervention of David Chen, had dismantled her control. As the plane finally touched down on the tarmac of San Francisco International Airport, the jolt of the wheels hitting the runway felt like a gavel striking a judgment rendered. Susan went through the motions of the landing announcements, her voice strained and robotic. She avoided looking at row 2 or 3. When the seatbelt sign switched off, Alani remained seated, allowing the other passengers to disembark. She saw David Chen stand up, and as he passed her seat, he paused. "I'm David," he said, extending a hand. "Alani," she replied, shaking it. "Thank you for that. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he said simply. "That was unacceptable. I run a company with over 10,000 employees. If I saw one of my managers treating someone like that, they'd be out of a job by lunchtime." He pulled a business card from his wallet. "This is my personal contact information. Sterling Airlines is one of our largest corporate accounts. We spend millions with them a year. When you file your complaint, and you absolutely should let me know, I'll be filing one of my own, with a direct call to the CEO, Robert Morrison. He takes my calls." Alani looked at the card. "David Chen, CEO, Cygnus Corp." Her eyes widened slightly. She knew the company. It was one of the biggest names in the valley. The apathetic man in the hoodie was a titan. This changed everything. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that went beyond the incident itself. "I will." He nodded and disappeared down the jet bridge. Alani took a deep breath and finally stood up. As she gathered her briefcase, she saw Susan standing by the cockpit door, talking animatedly with the captain, no doubt spinning her version of the story first. As Alani walked towards the exit, Susan turned and gave her a final look. It was not a look of apology or remorse. It was a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. It was the look of someone who had been beaten but not defeated, the look of someone already plotting their revenge. But Susan's plan for revenge was based on a fatal misunderstanding of the woman she had just insulted. She thought Alani was just a passenger. She had no idea about the steel in Alani's spine, the power of her new ally, or the incredible karmic twist of fate that was about to bring her entire world crashing down. Susan Hastings felt the familiar, satisfying click of her front door locking behind her. The sterile, generic air of her suburban condo was a welcome antidote to the chaos of the flight. She kicked off her sensible crew shoes, the ones that had carried her through countless miles of aircraft aisles over 2 decades, and let out a long, shuddering breath. The fury that had been simmering just beneath the surface since the confrontation in the galley now boiled over in the privacy of her own home. The nerve, she muttered to the empty room, throwing her crew bag onto a pristine beige armchair. The absolute entitled nerve. She replayed the scene in her head, editing it to fit her narrative. In her version, she was the victim. A calm, professional flight attendant, simply trying to do her job and ensure the safety of her passengers during a critical phase of flight. And she had been attacked, ambushed by 2 aggressive, race-baiting passengers who had conspired to make her life miserable. The woman that docked her, apparently though, Susan doubted it had been looking for a fight from the beginning, with her demanding tone and her uppity attitude. And the man, the one in the hoodie, was her accomplice, a white knight looking to score points. Susan's worldview was a fortress built over years of carefully selected bricks of experience. She saw the world not as it was, but as she needed it to be. In her world, people got what they deserved. The executives in first class deserved their champagne because they'd worked for it. She, with her 20 years of seniority, deserved the respect of her junior colleagues and the compliance of her passengers. And people who didn't fit, who felt other to her, were there because they hadn't earned their place. They were affirmative action hires, diversity quotas, guests in a world that wasn't truly theirs. She would never say these words aloud, of course. She was a professional. But the sentiment was the bedrock of her convictions. She had already filed her report. She'd made sure to do it the moment they landed before Alani or David Chen could file theirs. She painted a picture of 2 disruptive passengers, refusing to take their seats, becoming belligerent, and making unfounded, slanderous accusations to intimidate her. She highlighted her own professionalism, under pressure her commitment to FAA regulations. She was confident it would work. She knew the system. A veteran flight attendant with a spotless record versus 2 random passengers. The company would back her. They always did. The union would protect her. They had to. She poured herself a large glass of cheap Chardonnay. The crisp, acidic taste, a poor substitute for the fine wines she served but dared not sample. She sat at her kitchen table, the report filed, the incident behind her. She felt secure. What she didn't know was that miles away, in a sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, a ghost was stirring in the corporate machine of Sterling Airlines, and that ghost was about to haunt her. 2 weeks earlier, in that very same office, Robert Bob Morrison, the CEO of Sterling Airlines, had concluded a very difficult meeting. The airline was facing a crisis. Not a financial one, profits were steady, but a reputational one. A series of viral videos and news articles had painted Sterling as a company with a deep-seated culture problem. Accusations of racial profiling by gate agents, insensitive remarks by crew, and a general lack of diversity in its upper management were sticking. The hashtag #SterlingSoWhite had trended for 3 days. Their corporate clients, especially the massive progressive tech firms in their home base of San Francisco, were starting to make noise. Cygnus Corp. Their biggest account had sent a letter expressing deep concern over the airline's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Bob Morrison was a pragmatist. He didn't particularly care about social justice, but he cared deeply about the bottom line. He knew that in the modern corporate world, perception was reality, and the perception of Sterling was becoming toxic. He needed a big, bold move. He needed to show the world and his corporate clients that Sterling was changing. His board had approved the creation of a new executive position, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. But it couldn't be just anyone. It had to be someone unimpeachable, someone from outside the insular world of aviation. A person of color, obviously. A woman, preferably. Someone whose credentials were so stellar, whose reputation was so formidable, that their very hiring would be a statement. His executive search firm had spent a month vetting candidates, and they had found the perfect one. A celebrated surgeon, a pioneer in her field, known not just for her medical genius, but for her tireless work in community outreach and mentorship. A woman who had shattered glass ceilings with grace and grit. A woman who had recently expressed interest in pivoting from medicine to public health and corporate policy, looking for a new, broader way to make an impact. Her name was Dr. Alani Taylor. The offer had been made, and after careful consideration, accepted. The official announcement was scheduled for the following Monday. Her photograph was already loaded onto the company's internal servers. Her new office on the executive floor was being painted. Her name was on a list, a very short, very confidential list of soon-to-be senior executives. She was, for all intents and purposes, already one of the most powerful women in the company. She was the ghost in the machine. When Alani got home that evening, she didn't immediately call David Chen. She didn't fire off an angry email to Sterling's customer service. She sat in her quiet, art-filled apartment, looked out at the twinkling lights of the city, and considered her options. The surgeon's instinct took over. This was no longer just a personal insult. It was a data point. A perfect, vivid, infuriating case study of the very problem she had been hired to solve. To complain as a passenger would be one thing, but to arrive on her first day with this incident, to be able to say, "I haven't even officially started, and I have already personally experienced the toxic culture we need to eradicate." The power of that was immense. It was a gift in a twisted sort of way. Susan, in her blind prejudice, had handed Alani the perfect weapon, the ultimate mandate for the sweeping changes she was about to implement. The next morning, she sent a calm, factual email to Robert Morrison's personal address, an address she had been given during her hiring process. Subject: a personal experience on Flight 729. Dear Bob, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to you today not yet as your incoming VP of DEI, but as a passenger on one of your flights, yesterday Flight 729, from Atlanta to San Francisco. Unfortunately, the experience was deeply troubling and served as a stark first-hand confirmation of the challenges we have discussed. I was subjected to a consistent and deliberate pattern of discriminatory and hostile service by the lead flight attendant in the first-class cabin. This included being ignored, spoken to in a dismissive and demeaning tone, and having my direct requests for service refused for over an hour. The incident culminated in a confrontation where I was met with gaslighting and baseless accusations. Fortunately, another passenger, Mr. David Chen of Cygnus Corp., witnessed the entire exchange and intervened on my behalf. He has offered to corroborate my account and is, I believe, filing his own complaint about the matter. I have documented the details and will be prepared to discuss them further. I believe this incident, while personally offensive, provides an invaluable and powerful starting point for the work we are about to begin together. It highlights the urgent need for the systemic cultural overhaul we are committed to achieving. I look forward to seeing you on Monday. Best, Dr. Alani Taylor. When Bob Morrison read the email, his blood ran cold. He read it once, then a second time. He felt a wave of nausea. Of all the passengers in all the world, to have this happen to it had to be her. The one person who held the future reputation of his airline in her hands. And the witness David Chen, the CEO of their most important corporate client, the very man whose letter was sitting on his desk. It was a corporate nightmare of epic proportions. A public relations apocalypse in the making. His intercom buzzed. It was his assistant. "Sir, a Ms. Susan Hastings, a flight attendant, has been lionized in a few internal employee forums for her handling of a disruptive passenger incident on Flight 729. It seems her report has been circulated among some crew members. They're calling her a hero for standing up to entitled elites." Bob Morrison leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. A hero. They were calling this woman a hero. He felt a migraine beginning to bloom behind his eyes. He had a ghost in his machine, a PR nightmare on his hands, and a burgeoning rebellion in his ranks who had chosen the worst possible person as their champion. He picked up the phone. His first call was not to HR. It was not to the union. It was to his head of security. "Paul," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "I want every piece of data you can find on Flight 729 yesterday. I want the passenger manifest. I want all crew reports filed and unfiled. I want to know if there are any CCTVs in the jet bridge area. And I want the complete unedited personnel file of a flight attendant named Susan Hastings on my desk within the hour. No one, and I mean no one, is to know who is asking for this. Am I clear?" The game had changed. This was no longer a customer service issue. It was a C-suite crisis. Susan Hastings, sleeping soundly in her beige condo, dreaming the smug dreams of the righteous, had no idea that the full terrifying weight of a multi-billion-dollar corporation was about to descend upon her. She thought she had put out a small fire. She was about to be consumed by an inferno. The email landed in Susan Hastings's inbox on a Tuesday morning, a week after the flight. The subject line was bland, corporate, and utterly non-threatening mandatory crew debriefing, Flight 729. It was from a senior manager in the in-flight services department, a name she vaguely recognized. The body of the message was brief, requesting her presence at Sterling Airlines, corporate headquarters, near SFO on Thursday afternoon, for a follow-up discussion regarding the incident report she had filed. Susan's first reaction was a surge of vindication, a debriefing. This was it. This was the company doing its due diligence, and she would be the star witness. They would listen to her side of the story, commend her for her steady handling of a difficult situation, and that would be the end of it. The two troublemakers would likely get a form letter, and maybe a few thousand frequent flyer miles as a nuisance payment. That's how these things worked. A small, nagging worm of doubt wiggled in her mind. Why headquarters? Why not a simple phone call? Why a senior manager? But she quickly squashed it. Of course it was at headquarters. It was a serious accusation, racism, and they had to be seen to be taking it seriously. She would dress impeccably. She would be calm, professional, and factual. She would be the very model of a 20-year veteran. She even felt a flutter of excitement. This was her chance to be seen by management, to reinforce her reputation as a loyal, by-the-book employee. Meanwhile, in the executive wing of that same corporate headquarters, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. The room was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. Bob Morrison sat at the head of a long, polished mahogany table. With him were the head of human resources, a formidable woman named Linda, the airline's chief legal counsel, and Dr. Alani Taylor. This was her third official day of work. Spread across the table was the Susan Hastings file. It was thicker than Morrison had expected. Her 20-year record was not as spotless as she believed. There were no major disciplinary actions, but there was a pattern, a faint but discernible trail of breadcrumbs. 3 separate passenger complaints over the last decade, all with a similar theme: rude, dismissive, unprofessional. All 3 complaints had been filed by passengers of color, and in each case, Susan's written rebuttal had been eerily similar to the one she filed for Flight 7229. The passengers were agitated, demanding, looking for a handout. Each time the complaint had been quietly dismissed, a note placed in her file, but no further action taken. It's a classic case of a manager burying complaints to avoid conflict, Linda from HR said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on one of the reports. Her direct supervisor for the last 8 years is a guy who's 6 months from retirement. He hasn't rocked a boat in a decade. He just passed her reports up the chain with a note saying handled. And the internal forums? Morrison asked, looking at Alani. Alani pushed a tablet across the table. On the screen were screenshots from a private Facebook group for Sterling crew members. Susan's report, sanitized of passenger names, had been leaked and posted. The comments section was a cesspool. Finally, someone standing up to these people. Good for her. They think they can just play the race card and get whatever they want. I had a passenger like that last week. The entitlement is off the charts. Susan is a hero. The comments went on and on, a torrent of resentment and prejudice that had clearly been simmering among a faction of the crew for years. Susan Hastings wasn't an outlier. She was a symptom of a disease, and she had just become its poster child. And then there's this, the legal counsel added, sliding a folder across the table. It was David Chen's official complaint. It had not come through the customer service portal. It had come via a direct email to the entire Sterling Airlines board of directors. It was a meticulously detailed, damning account of the entire flight. It mentioned his position as CEO of Cygnus Corp. And concluded with a single, chilling sentence. We are currently reviewing the multi-million-dollar corporate travel account we hold with Sterling, pending a satisfactory resolution to this matter, which we view as indicative of a significant and troubling corporate culture issue. Bob Morrison felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Satisfactory resolution. He repeated the words, tasting like ash. And what exactly does he consider satisfactory? He was very clear in his follow-up call with me, the lawyer said. He wants 2 things. First, he wants to see meaningful systemic change in how Sterling trains and manages its employees regarding bias. Second, he wants the employee in question to be terminated. The word hung in the air. Termination. It was the corporate death penalty. The union will fight it tooth and nail. Linda from HR sighed. She'll claim wrongful termination retaliation. They'll argue she was just following safety protocols. It could get ugly and very, very public. All eyes turned to Alani. She hadn't spoken for several minutes, simply observing, processing. She was the surgeon looking at the full diagnostic picture before deciding on the course of treatment. It will get ugly and public anyway, Alani said, her voice cutting through the tension. The story is already out there in the private channels. It's only a matter of time before it leaks. We can either be reactive or we can be proactive. We can control the narrative or we can let the narrative control us. What do you propose? Morrison asked. We proceed with the debriefing on Thursday, Alani said. But it won't be a debriefing. It will be a formal hearing. You, Linda, and a representative from the union will be present. I will not be. My presence would only complicate things. Let her tell her story. Let her lie. Let her dig her own grave. Alani leaned forward. Give her all the rope she needs. Ask her specific questions based on David Chen's timeline. At 4:15 p.m. Pacific Time, Mr. Chen notes you served wine to seat 2A. Can you confirm? The passenger in 2B, Dr. Taylor, first pressed her call light at 3:50 p.m. It remained on until 4:15 p.m. Can you explain why it was not answered? Don't show her our evidence. Just ask the questions. Let's get her official recorded testimony on the record. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces at the table. Susan Hastings believes she is the hero of this story. She is arrogant, and her prejudice has made her sloppy. That arrogance is her weak point. We are going to use it and the truth to dissect her story with surgical precision. And when she has built her case on a foundation of lies, we will present her with the one thing she cannot argue with. David Chen's video, the lawyer asked. No, Alani said softly. Me. On Thursday, Susan walked into the conference room at Sterling headquarters, feeling confident and poised. The room was more formal than she expected. Linda, the HR head, was there, as was a senior VP of in-flight she'd never met. A grim-faced man from her union sat beside her. A court stenographer was setting up in the corner. A red flag went up, but the union rep whispered to her, "It's just procedure for a formal complaint. Stick to your report. You're golden." And so she did. For the next hour, Susan recounted her version of Flight 729. She was articulate, professional, and utterly convincing. She painted Alani as demanding and aggressive David Chen as her overbearing accomplice. She stressed the importance of safety protocols during descent. She insisted under direct questioning that she had not seen the call light, that she had been incredibly busy, and that her tone was never anything but professional. She denied every accusation of discrimination with a look of wounded sincerity. "I have been flying for 20 years," she said, her voice filled with practiced emotion. "I have served people of every race, religion, and creed. I do not see color. I see passengers. To be accused of this, it's the most hurtful thing that has ever happened to me in my career." She was brilliant. It was a masterful performance. She could feel the momentum in the room shifting. The VP looked sympathetic. Even Linda's stern face seemed to soften slightly. Her union rep gave her a subtle thumbs up under the table. She had done it. She had won. When her testimony was finished, Linda from HR looked down at her notes. "Thank you, Susan. That was very detailed. We have just one more person we need to bring in to corroborate a few final details." Susan felt a flicker of annoyance. Who else could there be? The captain. The other flight attendant. The conference room door opened and Dr. Alani Taylor walked in. She wasn't wearing a blazer or a doctor's coat. She was dressed in a simple, elegant sheath dress, carrying a Sterling Airlines corporate portfolio. She didn't look at Susan. She walked to the empty chair at the head of the table, sat down, and opened her portfolio. Susan stared, her mouth agape. It was the woman from the plane. What was she doing here? How had they found her? Why was she at the head of the table? Linda from HR cleared her throat. "Susan Hastings, I'd like to formally introduce you to Dr. Alani Taylor. Dr. Taylor is Sterling Airlines' new Executive Vice President for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She started on Monday. The words hit Susan with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of her lungs. The room suddenly tilted, the faces blurring. Executive, vice, president. Her mind reeled frantically, trying to process the impossible. The woman she had dismissed, ignored, and insulted was one of the highest-ranking executives in the entire company. She looked at Alani's face, truly looked at it for the first time. She saw not an entitled passenger, but a woman radiating a calm, unshakable power. And in her eyes, Susan saw not anger, but something far more terrifying clarity. It was the look of a surgeon who has just identified a cancer that needed to be cut out. The union rep's face had gone pale. The VP of in-flight was staring at his notes as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "You..." Susan whispered the single word, a croak of disbelief and horror. Alani finally lifted her gaze and met Susan's. Her expression was neutral. "Hello, Susan," she said, her voice even. "I believe we have a few things to discuss." The unraveling was complete. The foundation of lies had been built, and the truth had just walked in and taken a seat at the head of the table. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The debriefing was over. The judgment was about to begin. The silence in the conference room was a vacuum where Susan's confidence had once been. Executive Vice President. The title echoed in her mind, each word a hammer blow shattering the reality she had so carefully constructed. The woman from seat 2B was not just a passenger. She was power. She was the company. Susan's mind, so clear just moments before, was now a maelstrom of panic. Every lie she had just told under oath flashed before her eyes. Her union representative, Gary, looked at her with fury. He had been played walking his client into a perfectly laid trap. His expression said it all. "You let me defend a liar." Alani let the silence stretch a deliberate, surgical pause. This wasn't about personal revenge. It was about institutional change, and Susan Hastings was now Exhibit A. Finally, Alani spoke, her voice calm and measured. "Susan, we have your official testimony. In it, you state that you did not see my call light, that you treated all passengers equally, and that I was aggressive. You have painted a very specific picture." She slid a folder across the table. "This is a sworn affidavit from Mr. David Chen, CEO of Cygnus Corp., corroborating my version of events in every detail. Mr. Chen has made it clear that their multi-million-dollar corporate account is contingent on a satisfactory resolution to this incident." Susan stared at the folder, unable to move. "Furthermore," Alani continued, motioning to the large monitor on the wall. A grim-faced VP pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, showing video shot from a lap. It showed the back of Alani's seat, with the call light glowing brightly. The video then showed Susan walking past, glancing towards the row, before stopping to warmly offer the man in 2A another drink. The audio of her cheerful tone was crystal clear, and the timestamp corresponded exactly with the time Susan had sworn she was busy with safety checks. The video was short, but it was a stake through the heart of her testimony. It was irrefutable proof of her lie. The VP switched off the monitor. "And finally," Alani said, "there is my own testimony. Not as a passenger, but as an executive of this company. I am telling you and this panel that you subjected me to a deliberate and sustained act of racially motivated discrimination. You saw a black woman who you decided did not belong in your cabin, and you used your authority to demean and neglect her." The prosecution rested. Susan felt a wave of dizziness. Her career, 20 years of pride, was evaporating. She looked desperately at Gary, who just shook his head slowly. Her lies had tied his hands. To defend her now would be to sanction perjury. It was a misunderstanding. Susan stammered, the excuses sounding pathetic even to her own ears. I was stressed. Was it a misunderstanding when you did the same thing to Marcus Cole in 2018? Linda from HR asked, her voice like ice reading from the file. Or Mrs. Eleanor Vance in 2014. Or Mr. Kenji Tanaka in 2011. All passengers of color who filed complaints about your dismissive attitude. Was it a misunderstanding that you became a hero on private online forums for standing up to a black woman? The final nail. They knew everything. The fortress of her prejudice had been breached and its rotten foundations exposed. The fight went out of her, collapsing into a hollow, terrified void. She began to sob, not with dignity, but with pure panic. It was the sound of a world ending. Please, she choked out, looking at Alani. I need this job. I have a mortgage. I'm sorry. The apology, when it finally came, was not one of remorse, but of desperation. Alani watched her for a long moment, feeling a profound sadness for the waste. But her resolve did not waver. The issue, Susan, she said, is that I believe you are only sorry because you got caught. You are sorry because the woman you decided to target turned out to be your new boss. What if I had been just a doctor or a teacher? Would you be sorry then? Or would you be laughing about it with your friends? Alani stood, her presence commanding the room. Your employment with Sterling Airlines is terminated effective immediately. You will be escorted from the premises. She then addressed the stunned managers. And this is just the beginning. As of today, we are launching the Flight 729 initiative, a complete overhaul of our diversity and inclusion. Training mandatory for every employee. We will be auditing all past discrimination complaints and changing our hiring and promotion practices. We are going to rip out the rot that allowed this behavior to be acceptable. This will not be our culture anymore. Her gaze finally rested on Susan, who was being helped to her feet by a shell-shocked Gary. You wanted to be a hero, Susan. Alani said, her voice a simple statement of fact. And in a way you will be. Your story will be the cautionary tale we tell for years. It will be the catalyst for a change this company desperately needs. That will be your legacy. As security escorted a sobbing Susan Hastings from the room, a new era at Sterling Airlines had begun. The news of her termination spread like wildfire, accompanied by the announcement of Dr. Taylor's appointment and the Flight 729 initiative. The hard karma had landed not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap that shook the entire corporate structure. The ghost in the machine was now its pilot, Dr. Alani Taylor. The woman denied a glass of water now had the power to change the entire river's course. And she was just getting started. In the end, this wasn't just about one flight attendant. It was about a systemic culture that allowed prejudice to hide behind a uniform and a badge of seniority. Susan's hard karma wasn't just losing her job. It was becoming the unwilling symbol of the very thing she practiced intolerance. Dr. Alani Taylor didn't just win a personal battle. She used her unexpected position to launch a war against the quiet bigotry that poisoned so many of our institutions. This story is a powerful reminder that you never truly know who is watching and that every action, no matter how small, has a consequence. It proves that sometimes the best-laid plans of the prejudiced can backfire in the most spectacular, life-altering way. What did you think of Susan's instant karma? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that respect is non-negotiable and that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more true stories of justice being served.